Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and I don't mention this very often, but I also do reviews on the Gizaudio YouTube channel. So basically, all of the headphones, headphone amplifiers, DACs, DAPs, and any other equipment that you might occasionally see on my desk that does not get reviewed here, it gets reviewed there on Gizaudio. So if you are interested in more content like this, please head over and check it out. So I have another $200 IEM. This is the Dunu X Koto E2. This is of course a collaboration IEM between Dunu and a well-known Japanese YouTuber named Koto. And there are a lot of great sets in this $200 price range. And yes, I do review the occasional kilobuck set, but if you look at my more recent videos, many of the sets that I've been reviewing land around this $200 price point. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and of the more recent releases, only a few sets have really grabbed my attention, either because a particular set just came close to my tuning preference, like the Volume S, for example, or there was some other kind of standout characteristic or attribute that, well, maybe it didn't necessarily fall exactly within my tuning preference and maybe even had some coloration in its presentation. There was still something about it that drew me in and gave me the ability to connect with my music. And the Alba comes to mind. And that's actually currently my favorite $200 set. And this set definitely falls into that second category. It's got some coloration and it doesn't necessarily land within my tuning preference, but of course, the questions are, does it go too far with those colorations? And am I still able to connect with my music? Well, let's find out. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So in the box are the IEMs and cable, and since the cable is modular, they've also included two different termination options, a 3.5 single-ended and a 4.4 balanced option. They've also included one of my favorite Dunu cases, a cleaning tool, and a really nice assortment of ear tips. And these aren't just any ear tips. These are actually some of my favorites, the Dunu SNS and the Candy tips. So I can certainly appreciate that. It uses two dynamic drivers and two custom balanced armature drivers. It's got a pretty typical 3D printed resin shell construction, although Dunu does seem to take a little extra care when it comes to contouring and shaping the shell to ensure a solid build and a nice, comfortable fit. And that's definitely the case for me with these. I was able to achieve a very comfortable and stable fit, and I didn't have any issues with pressure buildup. The faceplate looks great. It has this darker, I guess you would call it maybe a dark turquoise and black stripe pattern with a little bit of a subtle sparkle mixed in, and in good light, if you look close, it does have some depth to it. It's subtle, but I do think it's very tastefully done. And then on the bottom of the shells are the left and right indicators and some Koto branding. As for the cable, it's the same cable that is included with the DaVinci. It's a 2-pin modular cable. Again, it has both a 3.5 and 4.4 swappable termination option. It's not the softest cable, but I would say that its design and its overall construction are still what I would consider to be very, very good for this price point. And even though, again, it is maybe a little on the stiffer side, it does still keep tangling to a minimum, and it's pretty easy to roll up and store. The case is also great for this price point. This is again the same case that was included with the DaVinci. I love the way it looks, although it is a little on the large side, but the main things are that it is protective and it accommodates the IEMs or any extra ear tips or accessories that you might want to bring along with you. All in all though, for $200, I think this is a pretty well appointed package. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to sound. Okay, so as I had mentioned in my introduction, the Koto E2 has some pretty significant coloration in its presentation, with the bass kind of being the star of the show. And when you hear me refer to a bass head IM, this is the type of tuning that I'm referring to. And just to remind you, my general tuning preference is neutral with a bass boost, but more of a moderate bass boost, like what you might see with the Volume S here, or even the Chopin. This is not that. This takes the bass energy to the next level. That said, I do think they tried to be a little more intentional about making sure there was sufficient energy in the top half, in the upper mids and treble, to attempt to keep everything in balance. And I do think they accomplished that for the most part, but my attention is definitely still being pulled towards the bottom half of the presentation. So let's go ahead and break things down, starting with the bass. So again, the bass is the star of the show with the Koto E2. And while I would consider most of its energy to be focused in the sub bass, it still has a lot of mid bass energy as well. So you're going to get a really healthy dose of both sub bass rumble and mid bass thump. And I have to say one thing for sure, the dynamic drivers, these dynamic drivers certainly do deliver good dynamic impact and physicality. And I would also say bass texture, bass speed, while maybe not the best that I've heard at this price point, is still quite good enough to where I don't feel like the bass is just a boomy mess. So you're not just getting a lot of bass, the quality of the bass is quite good too. Now, as for the mids, you guys know one of the things I always complain about is bass bleed into the mids, and I try to have a little grace with entry and mid-tier sets, but this handles that good actually for this price point. It has a little bit of bass bleed, but there's actually pretty good bass separation, which means the mid-range is going to sound clean and not bloaty. And it does have some warmth, so that does bring a little bit of richness to its mid-range presentation, but it doesn't necessarily, again, it doesn't strike me as muddy or uncontrolled. So you have a lot of bass and some warmth, but they've also managed to keep the mid-range pretty clean. I also think for balance purposes, they could have added maybe a little more upper mid-range, because considering the amount of bass energy, vocals can just at times sound maybe a little overpowered. But then you'd be pushing those upper mids up quite a bit. So I guess I'm not sure what the right answer is here. Not that it doesn't have sufficient vocal clarity. Vocals do still cut through nicely and they still maintain good clarity. But again, the bass does still dominate the overall presentation. And as far as its treble levels, they're okay in terms of how it plays off of the mid-range. I do feel like the balance between the treble and the mid-range is pretty good. And when you combine that energy, the treble energy and the upper mid-range energy, it helps to balance some of that bass energy out. But again, it is a bass dominant set by design. So the bass is still where your attention is going to be drawn to. However, again, I do think there is sufficient treble energy. The treble does sound a little smooth, but it's very natural. It also doesn't really ever reach the point of sounding sharp or harsh, but at the same time, it's it's also giving me not a lot of detail, but adequate levels of detail. And I also like that I'm getting some good treble extension and air as well. So again, given this tuning approach, I do think they found a pretty good balance as far as making sure there is enough treble energy to kind of help the mids balance all of that bass energy out, but at the same time making sure the treble does stay under control and doesn't start to sound overly aggressive or sharp. And as far as its technical performance, it's actually pretty good. I do feel like it competes with some of my top IEMs under $200 in terms of its detail retrieval, its staging. So the soundstage, while maybe not super wide, is I think above average for this price point. Imaging is also very good. Detail retrieval is also good. And again, because of the way they approach the treble tuning, they seem to find a good balance between keeping things natural, but also delivering some detail and micro details as well. Now, as far as comparisons, I should state really quickly that there are some sets, probably a lot, in this price range that I haven't heard. And hopefully I can get my hands on some other sets in this price range pretty soon. That said, I can only compare this with sets that I have heard or owned. I know there are other bassy sets out there, like the Punch Audio Martillo, but I haven't heard that set yet. And I also didn't really compare this with the Mega 5 EST because that's in a completely different price category. In any case, I do have some of my favorites out of the desk here. My top IEM at $200 being the Alba. Of course, this is going to be much bassier than the Alba. The Alba is more balanced, more natural. Its mid-range is more relaxed, but it does have a little more energy in the upper treble. And I also feel like the Alba has slightly better technical performance as well. That said, again, both of these sets are going to offer two very different types of presentations. So if you're looking for something more natural with less bass, then the Alba might be your best option. Then of course, if you want more fun, more bass, and maybe a more engaging experience, then the E2 would be the better option. And maybe just really quickly, and just in order to save time, all of these other IEMs are going to have a lot less bass than the E2. And they're also going to have less upper mid-range energy as well. But that extra mid-range, that upper mid-range energy in the Koto, I think it needed that extra energy up there to help balance out its bass. So in very general terms, just know the E2 is going to have a lot more bass and a lot more upper mid-range energy than any of my favorite sets and any of the sets on this table. And again, that is by design. They're trying to bring a less common tuning style to this price range. And I do feel like they accomplished that. And I guess another comparison could be with the Butterfly T, since that's my second favorite $200 IEM. And much like the Alba, it's also going to have a more relaxed bass, more relaxed upper mid-range, and it's just going to be more balanced and more natural sounding. But in terms of technical performance, I would say they're probably about the same. Now, in comparison with the Volume S in low impedance mode, even though again, this is a little more expensive, it is my favorite IEM in the $300 bracket. The E2 again has more bass energy. However, the upper mids of the Volume S, while definitely having less energy than the E2, does come a little closer than these other sets as far as its vocal forwardness. That said, the Volume S, again, to my ears, it's more balanced, more natural, and it also offers slightly better technical performance. So again, two very different listening experiences. Again, the E2 being more engaging, a little funner, and the Volume S being a little more laid back, a little more natural sounding. So again, two very different listening experiences. Now, as for whether or not the E2 gets my recommendation, I will just tell you, this is a little too bassy for me most of the time. However, I can see myself reaching for this set, again, occasionally, because from time to time, I do kind of like to switch things up and have a fun listening experience. But at the same time, I don't want to sacrifice naturalness, and I also expect pretty decent technical performance. And while this isn't maybe the most natural set in this price range that I've heard, it is one of the most natural bassy sets that I've heard in this price range, and its technical performance is very good for this price point. And for this having this amount of bass, surprisingly, it makes very few compromises in the overall quality of its presentation. And the bottom line is, while my My guess is this might be too bassy for some of you, but there will also undoubtedly be those who would still like having this as an option and having it available within their collection. And that's who I would recommend this for. And don't forget, it's a very well built and very well designed IM with a great case, a super solid modular cable. And I'll also say this set, in my opinion, while this may not be exactly, again, to my preference, I do consider this to be one of those rare standout sets. And yes, it's kind of bold, but I actually really do feel like it's bold done well. So that concludes my review of the Dunu X Koto E2. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.